with another LEGO City update and a new project, which is going to be a sawmill. For that, I've already prepared the basic structure of the building so we can directly dive into all the detail work, which is of course the most fun part of the entire design process. This right there is the roof, which can be taken off in one giant chunk so you can access the interior. And I think you guys know me by now. The next thing I did was getting rid of all the studs, and then this was the foundation for my favorite design part of the exterior part of this building. All these pipes I've added on top of the building for ventilation, which is of course quite important for a building where you have all the sawdust on the inside. For this larger tower, I decided to continue with these pipes, although in this case this is most likely for water, I guess, which is of course also needed inside. And talking about the inside, I think it's time to continue building right there. I've now covered up the entire floor, and next up it was time to build the actual heart of the building, which is of course the saw itself. This is also what this green cube right there is supposed to be. Most important part is once again getting rid of all the sawdust, and therefore I've added these two tubes right there, which then go into this giant tower and immediately blast out all the air. This right there is the first part of the conveyor belt, which is then used to transport the giant tree logs right inside the saw, and then afterwards you'll see that in a second at this part of the conveyor belt, this is where then the finished cut wooden boards come out of the saw. Right there you can also see that I've added this sort of ramp towards the side of this conveyor belt to be able to simply take out wood and continue working with the material. And now this is what I've also mentioned just a second ago. There you can see the log behind the machine, and then in front right here, this is where all these wooden boards then come out, cut by the machine, which simply meant that at this point I continued decorating the rest of the building with some workers, a ton of wood, and so on. And now placing that finished building inside the LEGO City, we of course now have to continue on the outside. First of all, we have this gap in height for the conveyor belt. On the other side of the building, we also need to continue the conveyor belt, and therefore, first of all, it was time to add the ground structure, and this is a building technique I've used at several different spots in this rural area of my LEGO City, and therefore it works really well and is this reappearing design pattern, which is always important for larger mocks. This is the building technique of the conveyor belt. I've turned the studs of this little build by 180 degrees, and therefore everything is knotted, as we like to call it. And for the other part of the conveyor belt, I did the exact same thing. Right there, I used this 1x1 round brick, used a bar in the middle, turned the studs by 180 degrees, and the stability is then gained by simply having several of these connections, and then you get this finished little model right there. On the other side of the building, I of course did the exact same thing to the outside, covering up the floor, and now it was time to add this modified conveyor belt, which I've extended a bit towards the outside into the building. So this is where you then place the log on. It gets carried inside the sawmill and then comes out of the other side. The only thing that was missing at this point was my favorite part, to be honest with you. This right there is where all the logs are stored before then being worked with inside the sawmill. And well, I don't think you have an idea of how much time it took me to prepare all these logs right there, but I could finally use all these printed 2x2 round tiles with the wood pattern on it I bought like 2 years ago, simply because I like this type of brick, and now I finally found a good use for that part. Right next to that part, I've added these short train tracks, which is for this crane that is used to then grab the wood logs, transport them over to the conveyor belt, take them off the train in the first place when they are delivered, and of course I've also added a bit of functionality to the entire thing. The only thing I gotta say is it's quite ugly, but that's because there you can see it. The original designs of those things I used as a template are quite ugly. Now, however, in this entire chain of events, when it comes to transforming a wood log into several wooden boards, we still need this machine right there. This is a debarking machine, if you want to call it like that. So as you might have guessed, what this thing does is it removes the entire bark of the tree before the log is then being sawed inside the sawmill, and therefore I've also added this sawdust right here on the exterior, which is thrown out of the side of the machine. Really nice detail if you ask me right there. And talking about details, what of course still has to be done is I added a bit of vegetation around the building, which immediately makes a ton of difference. Another thing I added is this container right there to get rid of waste, which then can also be transported off the facility by train. And on the other side of the building, where the finished product is then coming out of the sawmill. I still needed to add details, and what of course is quite realistic in fact is that a ton of wood is simply being stored, waiting right there to be loaded up on the truck and exported from the facility. Also right there I could make use of all these lovely printed 1x3 flat tiles, which just gives the entire build another extra level of detail. So with that first project of today's LEGO City update being completed, and before we dive into the extremely dangerous work, I'll quickly show you the before and after picture. I tried to recreate the perspective as perfectly as I could somehow do it, and this is what these two entire new base plates now look like. And with that, now it gets dangerous, because next up it was time to remove every single building from the little village, because we still miss one thing that is extremely important. The lighting is missing in this section. So over the past weeks we not only did a ton of new building, but also we lit up this entire section right there. This is now what the backside of all these new buildings looks like, and then afterwards my brother rebuilt the village. At this point, however, this is what it looked like underneath the LEGO City, which of course meant we needed to do a ton of organization, otherwise you simply lose track of where which cable goes. And now at night, this is now what firstly the lit up houses look like, and then this is the best effect if you ask me, all the street lanterns right there. We also added little flickering LEDs to the candles at the graveyard right in front of the little church in the background. And also, talking about the church, we did another thing. First of all, I remodeled the clock tower and, most importantly, the bell. This is what the new design of this bell now looks like. And what I've also done is I added this mechanism where you can now actually swing the bell if you pull on that cable I've added right there, which is something you often find in smaller chapels. And the way this is now connected to the rest of the church is I added this small hole to the roof of the clock tower, then threaded this cord down through the hole and connected the bell with the clock tower. And the way this mechanism now works is I have first of all removed the roof of the church, and then you can see the stud of the string down there, and if I pull on that like this, then up here on top the bell rings. And of course, one thing that's now missing is the sound effect. And for that we added a little speaker right underneath the church, and this is what this now sounds like. Coming back to the section of the LEGO City we've been working on towards the beginning of today's video, what you might notice in the background right there is that we slowly but surely start to run out of space. Of course, we still have that transition from the airport towards the rest of the city missing, and then also maybe another train station right there in the corner. But overall, I think towards the end of this year, this section could be somewhat completed. And although I already have plans on how I'm going to continue with that area and maybe switch out certain parts of the LEGO City, of course you might understand that I get somewhat nervous because, well, I thought